one question I frequently get asked is, how many tulips am I able to grow in this small space over here? And really, how much money am I able to make off of this? So now that we are in February, I thought this would be a good time for me to do a review of how much I sold in January, of course, including the costs and some other stuff for you to consider if you want to grow in this kind of footprint. So this is the setup that I have. I affectionately call this the Mouse Fortress. My husband and I built this, and it's just because we know that we have mice around the house, so we wanted to make sure that these bulbs would be protected. Now, this is roughly, by a length perspective, 4.5 feet, and it is roughly 2.5 feet deep. So, obviously the height over here is based off of how high you want it to be, but this was a 3-tiered shelf. And I would say that if I could do it over, I would get a taller shelf, so that way I don't have to continuously rotate trays in and out. But for the most part, this setup really, really works for us. And then of course, I do have some extras over here in my dog's former crate. So this is a large dog crate. It's about 3.5 feet deep by a little less than 2.5 feet wide over here. And I'm able to fit 2 soil crates in here. And the reason why I put soil crates in here is because it's a little bit messy when you're watering with soil crates, and just, with the dirt and everything, I want to make sure that everything is contained. So you can see that we've got quite a few tulips coming in. Every single hydroponic tray can hold anywhere from, let's say, 70 up to 100 bulbs. It does depend on the size of your bulb, how good you are at making sure you're being efficient with the space. But let's just say on average, you're able to do like 80, 85 bulbs in here. So it is quite a lot that you can cram into one tray. So I've got 3 trays and I've got 3 shelves, right? So, when you do the math, you're getting anywhere from 800 to 900 bulbs in a single succession. So if you're able to plan your successions out well, then, you have trays that are rooting somewhere else. You can bring them in and then you can bring these out. I unfortunately do not have that many trays to do that. So that is one goal for next year. But I do want to point out that, similar to most seedling setups, I have 2 shop lights on each shelf, and you'll see why I'm talking about that. But yeah, this is the current setup, and all of these flowers will be perfect for Valentine's Day. So this is actually at a perfect stage for me to harvest. I'm going to harvest with the bulb on, and then I'm going to keep them in our garage where it's going to stay really cool. And then these tulips will be fresh. I'll actually have another video on just how I am dry storing as well as storing with bulbs, and experimenting with how to basically prolong vase life there. So yeah, let's actually start digging into the numbers upstairs. So I am back upstairs and ready to dive into January numbers. Let's talk about how much I sold first. So I sold $547 worth of tulips. These tulips were sold primarily on Facebook Marketplace. There are some people who were buying from me who followed me on Instagram, that they learned about me from the farmers market that I did last year. But this was all directly retail, right? There was no wholesalers, none to florists for this number. And I would say that I sold the majority of them in $20 bouquets. So anywhere from 8 to 10 stems, depending on just stem length and then the head of the tulip itself. So that equates to about 300 sold stems. And I say 300 sold stems because I grew more than 300 stems. I actually grew, or I was planning on growing something more like 900, 1,000 stems. It did not all come in together in the same succession. In fact, I would say that for the majority of my January blooms, I was actually pushing them to be later January, if not early February, to catch Valentine's Day, right? I wanted to hoard all the stems in the world for Valentine's Day, and I started getting stems ready in, I would say, like January 13th, January 14th. I had a couple of successions that were done by the 16th of January, and so it was just like, I just have to move these. So anyway, that is a bigger lesson for me in terms of succession planning for next year. But one of the biggest learnings for me was that hydroponics, growing indoors, it turns really, really quickly, right? So within that small footprint, you can see I can fit 9 trays without the dog crate. you could hypothetically turn that every 6 to 7 weeks, depending on the varieties that you're growing. So if you're growing 800, 900 in a given cycle, that means every month and a half-ish, you can grow 800, 900 stems in that place, right? It's a lot of stems. So that's 300 sold stems. I would say that, I grew more. I gave a bunch to friends and family. I kept some for myself. I bring a bouquet to work every single week. We have this like long conference table, and I actually just put the bouquet in the middle, and it really does cheer everyone up. I mean, there's some people who actually will sit at the conference table for the flowers, which I find really funny. But I also sacrifice some to experiment. So one example is this one over here. So, these are tulips that I actually dried, stored for close to 2 weeks. Then I took them out. I've been experimenting with, should I put quick dip or not? So I have a control group, and when that video is ready, I will definitely be sharing my post-harvesting and storing techniques. But for the time being, I would say I've had a couple dozen tulips that I've sacrificed for experiments. So, at the end of the day, sold 300 and made $547. But let's actually talk about cost, because cost is an important piece here. And actually, before I talk about cost, the 547 is a relatively decent number for me. I mean, one of the things you have to realize is that I didn't sell really anything during the first half of January. This is really the last 2.5 weeks of January when I had stems to sell. And I wasn't really trying to push too many stems because I needed them for Valentine's Day, right? So as I had stems that were harvestable in later January, I would say the last week and a half of January, I started putting them into the fridge and dry storing them for Valentine's Day. So this is not even the full potential of what I could sell. Right now, I am just limited by how many stems I'm growing versus the selling potential. There was a certain point where it felt like I just could not keep up with the demand. I mean, there are times where, someone wants to buy 3 bouquets and someone wants to buy 2, and you get another couple of people come and buying one bouquets, right? So you get to 10 bouquets, and at like 8 to 9 stems each, that's 80 to 90 stems, right? That's like a full tray. So you're kind of just like wipe clean, and I'm having maybe like 2 trays coming at the same time. So now you're starting to get an idea for just, how much potential there is and how I'm limited by what I am growing in terms of quantity. All right, but cost, right? So cost, I think of it in 2 ways. There's the cost to grow these stems, and then there was the upfront cost that I had to invest in order to know how to grow these stems, to be able to build the mouse crate, the trays, and all that stuff. That stuff adds up. So let's talk first about the costs to grow individual stems. So there's 3 components. There's the cost of the lights, to run the lights. There's the cost of the bulbs, and then there is a line that I call wastage, and I'm going to get more into detail about wastage. But grow lights, so I'm talking here just about how much does it cost for me to run grow lights. I have a lot of grow lights, and it's just one of those things where I'm not going to factor it in as an overhead cost. It might be something that you want to factor in, especially if you have to start completely anew. So grow lights, I did a video last year about how much does it cost to run grow lights. It could be a little bit more than what you think, especially if you have multiple shelves. It is a necessary thing if you want to grow from seed. But for me, roughly every single day, I'm spending $1 to run our grow lights. So that includes the 2 shop lights on each shelf. So because I have 3, that's 6, plus what I call the fancy seedling lights that emit a purple and blue color, which look purple. Those were the 2 lights that were above, or that were shining within the dog crate for the soil crates. And that altogether is about $1 a day. So in the month of January, we have 31 days. That is $31 for the cost to run grow lights. Then there's the cost of the bulbs themselves. I would say that in year 1, I definitely paid above what I would have liked to for pre-chilled bulbs, but you have to figure out who you can get pre-chilled bulbs from. There was a supplier who I ordered 3,000 bulbs from. I asked them to be pre-chilled. I think that they did pre-chill some of them, but they didn't pre-chill all of them. And then a lot of them actually came to me in not so great shape. And for hydroponic forcing, you do want bulbs to be in better shape. So I ended up spending a little bit more money buying bulbs from the Tulip workshop. They did source varieties that you normally actually can't find through the normal distributors. So there were some things that I was growing, like this is a very good example. This one is called Verona Sunrise. It's this like double peony type of tulip, and it's got these like gorgeous, like it's obviously pink in undertone, but it's got these like gorgeous yellow, orange, blushy undertones. And so it's a really, really fantastic tulip, and it's not a tulip that you're going to be able to find everywhere. So they were able to work with I think a smaller grower out in the Netherlands and be able to basically import a full shipping container's worth of bulbs. And they only offer it to their students. So I bought bulbs from them. And what that meant was that I averaged about 50 cents of bulbs for the varieties that I grew in January. I would realistically like to see that number be closer to the lower 40-cent mark. But it is what it is, right? So at 50 cents a bulb, I grew 300 sellable stems. That gets me to $150 for the cost of growing those bulbs. Now that third line called wastage here, wastage, typically we all buffer a 20% margin for just things not going right, tulips not growing in the field, all that stuff. I had more than 20%. In fact, my wastage, I'm calling it 150 bulbs. And that wastage was due to either improper rooting because I was not diligent enough about making sure that the water was touching the roots. Some trays actually just completely ran out of water. Tulips go through so much water, and you don't realize this until you start growing hydroponically. I would say that there were days where, or not days, but for a single tray, I'd be watering it, giving it 8 cups of water, which I believe is half a gallon every 4 to 5 days. Like it is, 80, 90 bulbs in a tray. There's a lot that's all uptaking water, but that was still a lot more water than what I would have expected. So improper rooting. And then the other piece was what I just talked about, right? I got some bulbs that I don't think were sufficiently fully cooled by the supplier, and it resulted in this, which is a super, super short, I mean, there's no stem, right? It's just like, it's almost like it just grew a flower. And I'm pretty sure that my suspicion is right, because we know that tulips need a cooling period in order to grow. But the other piece is that this did not happen to any other bulbs that I've gotten from other suppliers. Some of the varieties I got from this supplier did fine, and I think that they received adequate cooling. But, this is a super parrot. It was really disappointing because super parrots are really coveted. They're really specialty type. And luckily I got like a decent enough price point off of this. I think they were 37 cents each, but still, I lost half a tray of this. So losing like 50 times 37 cents each, that's like close to what, like $20, right? So, it's nothing to sneeze at, but it is what it is, right? So that totaled to $256 for the cost of just growing these 300 stems. But let's talk about costs that need to get quote unquote smoothed out over time. So the cost to build the mouse fortress was $166. That included the lumber as well as the wire mesh that goes around to make sure that the mice don't crawl in, and some other small things. The trays, I spent $240 on the trays. Now that is also including shipping. It was really expensive to ship the trays. The trays are normally $20 each. They arrived, some of them arrived damaged, so I got replacements. And as a way to, help the company out, I actually ordered more trays. So I got charged for the shipping of those 2 replacement trays, in addition to the trays that I ordered, in addition to the trays that I had bought before and got damaged, right? So I actually overpaid for shipping. I didn't make a big deal out of it because they are still a small family-owned company. So they're roughly about $30 each, including shipping. And so for 8 paid trays, that's $240. I'm gonna need more trays next year, and I'll be honest, I'm not looking to buy these trays. In fact, I've contacted a supplier out in the Netherlands. They haven't gotten back to me yet, but you can buy a pallet's worth of trays. It's 70 trays. And although I won't need all 70, I have a feeling I could use 30 to 40. So in that case, I would just, sell them locally. And they're much better quality trays. The other thing to note was that these trays were used. They were a little bit of a pain to clean. So $20 plus the $10 shipping for used trays, that some of them were not even in, good condition in the sense that the needles were a bit broken off. I don't feel like that's good value. But anyway, they got the job done. I needed the trays, right? So necessary evil here. I'm still really glad that the company was selling those trays, because then I would have nothing to grow with, right? And then last but not least, if you've been following me, you know that I took the tulip workshop earlier in the year last year, and that was really the investment into education to teach me how to grow these. I will definitely say that if I did not take the workshop and did not have the Facebook group to troubleshoot, there is no way I could be growing this quantity. I could have gotten lucky on a few trays, but there's a lot of troubleshooting and a lot of disease related, variety related things that I would not have known, and I would have wasted way more bulbs. So all that to say, these costs to be smoothed out, they totaled $1,956. So roughly we're talking about $2,200 in costs that I would need to make back this year just to break even, right? So, when I think about expanding for next year, I'm going to need more shelf space. I'm going to need more hydro trays, right? So this kind of stuff just keeps on piling on. And the question is just, can you at least make back what you put in this year? The biggest cost is that tulip workshop, right? It's $1,550, but that's a one-time investment that I don't need to make again. And once I make that back, everything else is a much lower hurdle for me to have to get through to make back. So let's talk about Valentine's Day and going forward. Valentine's Day is literally less than 2 weeks away. I have been storing a little bit over 100 stems since late January. And then I would say another 250-ish, maybe 300 stems coming in. So let's just say I have 350 total stems. That's not a lot of stems. I mean, if I put 10 in a bouquet, just to make numbers easy, you're talking about 35 bouquets. And I was recently actually featured in a local article, and the orders just came in. So it's one of those things where I'm a little bit nervous right now that I may not have enough stems, because I'm actually partnering with a local cafe that sells boba tea. I actually got used tea leaves from them over the summer to put into my compost pile. But I am partnering with them on the 13th and the 14th to bring bouquets in and sell. And I don't know how many bouquets I'm going to realistically be able to bring over there, but we shall see. So that's Valentine's Day. And I think that I will get a good bump in February in terms of sales from that. But I'm going to have more successions. I still have more tulips in my refrigerator. And I plan to really have tulips until at least at this point, April, unless if I want to purposely delay forcing for Mother's Day. And I think a lot of that will depend on just how mild the weather stays. We're getting a cold snap soon, but what does February look like? And if it's really, really mild and I get all my tulips, basically by Easter, a couple of weeks after Easter. This year, Mother's Day in the US is a little bit later. I might want to consider holding some bulbs back to force. But let's just say I get 3 total successions out of this, right? So I've had 1 succession and I'll have 2 more. And for the ease of doing math, let's just say that each succession gets me that $500 of revenue. At the end of the day, I am not going to change that wastage number, because the longer you hold bulbs dry, right, not in soil, the higher probability you have of encountering disease and all that stuff. So I would keep that wastage number just to be conservative. Now, over 3 months, that means I would bring in a total of $1,500. My costs, right, so taking out the cost that you need to smooth over, but just the cost of growing was roughly about 46% of my revenue. So at that point, 46% of $1,500 gets me to $702 in profit. So, not going to make back the cost of workshop, going to make back the cost of other stuff. But again, this is a relatively conservative number. I have tulips that are out in the field, and at the end of the day, I will make back the money. It's just not necessarily going to be just from the forced tulips. I am going to need probably another season in order to make back the cost of the workshop as well as the infrastructure. And that's one of the takeaways here, is that when you invest in a workshop that is over $1,000, you are really going to have to grow a certain amount of volume in order to make that money back. I think that people who grow in a much smaller space, they're only selling, a few dozen bouquets, it's hard to make that money back. So it's definitely something for you to consider. And look, you don't have to make that money back all at once, right? And hypothetically, you don't need to make that money back at all, especially if it's something that you enjoy learning about, right? Not everything has to have that positive ROI, but if you're going into this wanting to make money, then you should be cognizant of just how many you need to grow in order to make that back. Now, that being said, at this point, January was actually a relatively good month for me. I've in some ways diversified how I make money from flower farming. And this does not apply to everyone, but obviously, YouTube and selling my ranunculus corms that I could not use all of them for, brought in some additional revenue. So between YouTube and the ranunculus corms, I actually I brought in an extra $1,000 worth of revenue. So from a cash flow perspective, I'm actually in a very good place, setting myself up for the spring and all that stuff. But again, a lot of these costs were fronted up a few months ago, having needed to buy the ranunculus corms, even my investment in the time that I have to make YouTube videos, right? Like all of that are like, it's costs that I've paid already, and now I am starting to reap the benefit. And so for you guys out there, you're buying a lot of seed, you might also be still buying bulbs and tubers, right? You're putting that money up front now, but you will reap it back later. It's just always a matter of managing your costs so that you're not too cash flow constrained and don't have enough cash to pay for stuff on time. So anyway, I hope this video was helpful for you. I hope this video also gives you some clarity around, look, I don't have a greenhouse outside. I don't have a low or high tunnel. I don't have any fancy structures, right? Obviously not all of us have basements. Basements are more of I think a Northeast type of thing. I don't even know if other countries have basements, but the point that I loved about the tulip workshop was you take whatever structure you have that's existing and you try to make it work for you. So, my garage acts as a rooting zone because the temperatures are cool enough for that. And then my basement is a perfect growing environment. There are plenty of people who grow in a shed or root in a shed, and they just make it work, right? So the point is that you don't need a greenhouse to be growing in the winter. And I would challenge you to think about ways that you can extend the shoulder season so that way it's not a lot of pressure on you to be able to grow as much as possible in the height of summer when everyone else is growing. So let me know if you have any questions or comments below, and I'll see you next time.